Hello, welcome back to another week with Out on That Line podcast. I'm Jeff with my co-host Alex. As always, Alex, how you doing this week?
Oh, I'm ready to make a spicy meatball, Jeff. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic this week. It is a wonderful 68 degrees down here in Texas right now, but apparently we've got a freeze coming on. We're going to try to stave off those bad feelings though with we'll see what kind of feelings this week when we talk about Zach Bryan and the new album with Heaven on Top. Now, Zach Bryan, I think, has in general been a positive on the podcast so far. I think musically, in general, a positive. Socially, his antics have worn a little thin with me specifically, and I may pay more attention to that kind of stuff than you do. So I don't know where your mileage is at with that. But Zach Bryan has kept himself at the forefront of country music one way or another, pretty much for years now. This album with Heaven on Top, I feel like, was one of the more anticipated albums that he's released. And a man of the kind of prolific output that he has, for an album to get kind of the build up and the hype that this one did, I was honestly pretty surprised because he has had some very popular releases, but maybe he just like dropped him more by surprise than this one because this was very anticipated, especially within the country Americana category.
Well, and see, that's interesting because it completely flew under my radar until one day I was on Spotify and I saw, this artwork and with Heaven on Top, and I went in and was like, oh, it's a whole album. And true to Zach Bryan form, it's an hour and 18 minutes
Yeah.
long, which in this context is a punishing length. There are certain artists and certain sounds and styles that lend themselves to a long album experience because they're doing something a little different. They're taking you on a bit of a journey. So I'll just say right off the top, this was about twice the length it needed to be. And it's borderline the same song repeated over and over and over again. That's a big problem I have with Zach Bryan is he's very prolific, but a lot of the shit comes out sounding like a first draft. And a lot of it, like not every cut needs to make the album necessarily, my guy.
Mhm.
And I also want to say off the top, like as we go through this, I'm trying to just look at this album and the pieces of himself that he puts in it and not necessarily measure it against any controversy or the way that I feel about him. Because I do think the guy kind of sucks. I think he's kind of a shithead. And we
Yeah.
can get into some of the controversy. And I don't even necessarily dislike him for like the chicken fry stuff. Again, we'll get
Yeah.
into all the like hot goss. But I think I kind of ran into that double buzzsaw of I don't really like this guy, and his music was already starting to sound like all the same to me and all run together. And unfortunately, I don't think this album did a ton to dispel that for me.
So I think we're gonna have somewhat similar feelings about how much of this album was kind of worth it, but I think we're taking very different roads to get there. I think this is going to be very like interesting to talk about because on my side, like the way in I remember this one being anticipated, and just to kind of like wrap up that previous point, he released a snippet of the song Bad News, like a part of it, where he was talking about, and ICE is going to come knock down your door, and a couple of verses or some more lines after that. But just like that snippet got released, I think a couple months ago now at this point. So it kind of made the rounds. Obviously, people were like, oh, what does he mean? Zach Bryan, I think, has always musically at least been very like apolitical, as far as like not drawing the hard line one way or the other. I think he's always like kind of espoused like political views in some context here and there. But it's I think always painted as like his personal viewpoint, and none of it has ever been that controversial. From everything I've got, what I mean? It's like talking about veterans' rights and things like that. So things that generally people are going to agree with him on that aren't really sticking points for political parties one way or another. It's just those are not the lightning rod political issues we have right now, the things that he's talking about. But that song did, or that snippet did create a lot of kind of a political divide with people of, a lot of folks that love country music and love the Jason Aldean and Brantley Gilbert and like that side of country music, hearing Zach Bryan sing a song that sounds critical of ICE, and that's up to you to kind of interpret with this. I think throughout a lot of this album, a lot of it is up to your interpretation. He's just getting this stuff out there for us to like make sense of ourselves, I suppose. But it did cause a lot of like a political firestorm. And I think Zach Bryan has kind of implied that he's definitely right now not in agreement with current administration, which that started to snowball more and more. So like the anticipation for this album, I heard that snippet of the song and I was very excited because I was like, that sounds badass. Like he mentioned Bruce Springsteen. Again, a huge influence across this whole album. There's a couple other artists that I'll bring up too when we talk about that. And again, I think we'll have different views about him wearing those influences on his sleeve versus them being kind of ripped off of those influences. I think there's arguments for either way. And I think that'll be interesting to talk about when we get to that point. But I think this is, Zach Bryan's big swing of an album so far, I think is what he was attempting with this one. I think it's clear, to go along with your point, that he is a creator. He's not an editor. And I think that's I read, I think, a review or some description of him like that online. And I thought it was just kind of the perfect way to put it, because there is a lot on this album that I think you could remove, certainly beef up. But I do think there's a lot on this album that I found like very inspired. And for me, like my maybe hot take is I think Zach Bryan is like this close to making like an American classic album.
Here's the thing. So to preface my next point, it's that it's not that I think he's bad. It's not like
Mhm.
you gave us an hour and 18 minutes of slop.
There's just too much.
He's talent. It was too much, and it
Yeah.
was too much of the same thing in the context of each song in the album. Like you look at the album and you go, there's a good album in there.
Mm.
Unfortunately, there's a bunch of stuff we could lose. And quite frankly, a lot of it not only sounds the same as each other on this one album, but as like everything that's come before, which we talk about this all the time. It's not about radical reinventions, but it is about kind of giving us something new. And he goes back to the well on a lot of the same topics. So actually seeing him get hyper political would be welcome. I
Mm.
don't know if it's interesting to him, but it would be interesting to me to hear him open up more about it, because he kind of pays lip service to some of the stuff that we're aware of, this
Mhm.
controversy with his dating life. And is he an asshole? Is he emotionally abusive? Is he a bad boyfriend? And again, how relevant is all of that to his music? I guess to the degree that he's willing to talk about it. Like you may decide not to support him because like that was my instinct, was like, okay, well, we got a woman accusing a man of abuse, you got to take that seriously, and so I'm going to err on the side of listening to her story, and okay, this is where we dig in. And then as more of it comes out, I can't say like, no, that's bullshit, he did or he didn't do anything. My analysis, they're two shitty people. She might even be worse than him, because it sounds like everybody at Barstool fucking hates her, chicken
Mhm.
fry. But it also sounds like she like dumped her best friend of 15 years when she started to like pick up traction, and
Mhm.
it was just this whole thing. And it doesn't excuse him if he's being emotionally abusive or if he's being a shitty boyfriend. But I guess like you look at all of that, and that's the lore of the person. It's not necessarily the music. And it's the age-old question. Michael Jackson, R. Kelly, can you separate the art from the artist? And that's like an individual basis
Mhm.
type thing. So with Zach Bryan, I don't necessarily anymore, after my gut reaction, but I don't necessarily hold like I think the guy might be kind of a prick against him to the point where I
Mhm.
can't acknowledge his talent, because I can acknowledge his talent. I think this is a case of prolificacy is just like working against him. He's
Yes.
got so much coming out. It's like shorter releases. You talk about like he's this close to like a quintessential Americana, folk, country, whatever release.
Mhm.
To follow the Springsteen parallel, and maybe this is blasphemy, but he's talented enough. He could have a Nebraska in him. He
Mhm.
could have a Nebraska in him, but he won't as long as he keeps making the same song an hour and 18 minutes at a whack.
Mhm.
It to me is a barrier between enjoyment, because those little joys that I pick up, which are the things that I'm sure people fucking hate, like rivers and creeks, but I
Mhm.
look at that and I'm like, this is sloppy, this is barely taking itself seriously, and I'm actually having a lot of fun with it. And it's like you need more variance, you need more chances like that, mixed in with the honesty and the really like image driven lyrical content. I for me, the risk is in like just this huge volume with not enough variance
Mhm.
in between the songs.
And that is, I think, an absolutely fair criticism of this one. And I think me coming into this album probably a lot more positive in general on, like, I still actively listen to quite a bit of Zach Bryan's music. Like, I think Something in the Orange is a really, really incredible song. I listen to it all the time. That song he did with Casey Musgraves was really, really great too. And so I'd listen, those made it on the playlist, and I'd listen to those all the time. So I probably was already more inclined to I guess, I acknowledge the same things about just the sheer length of the album, and that it was pretty unnecessary. I think the main issue I find with it, and I'm finding more clarity and kind of coming to my point with this, with hearing you talk about it too, is just it feels unfocused. It feels like each song there is focus on creating that thing in that moment, but not a lot of like, okay, how are all of these things making one album? And I think if you fully commit to just the stream of consciousness type of thing, like Rivers and Creeks, and you just commit to doing those kind of really, I don't want to say janky, that makes it sound like it's a negative thing, but like just the rougher kind of sounds, like, and make it seem like I'm like that's the background music to Dead River Rough Cut. Shout out to that DVD. Any folks, if you know on that one. Just really, really fantastic. It's about a couple guys in the Maine backwoods that just decided to leave society behind and videotape their whole journey doing it. It was back in like the 70s.
Much like me.
Yeah, I mean, just fantastic, living off the land, like literally slaughter a pig. There's a version of it where it's like you can choose not to have that scene in there. Really incredible stuff. But back to my point, like that kind of song would be great as a whole album. Even if it's a short one, do like an 8 or 9 song album, like Sturgill did with the Ballad of Dude and Juanita. If you had just sprinkled a couple of those songs from that album into any other Sturgill album, they would have sounded crazy out of place. But those all together in that theme sounded great. And I think his problem with this album is you've got like 3 different albums he was trying to do in this. And you could probably pick a third, like divvy them up in thirds and organize the songs kind of by their sounds, by their genre, by their instrumentation. You probably get 3 decently solid albums out of this. I think his use of horns in a lot of these songs was really, really great. The inspiration, I heard a lot of Jason Isbell in this. I heard a lot of Warren Zevon in a couple of these songs. Overall, a ton of Bruce Springsteen. It really, to me, there was a lot of influences present at certain times. I felt like there was a couple songs, especially in the middle of the album, where I felt like I was almost just listening to a Jason Isbell song. And when it gets to that point where when I'm not just acknowledging like, oh, that's a cool little, like when you hear the same kind of guitar solo in Bat Out of Hell as you hear in Bruce Springsteen's music, it just like rings that little bell for you, and you're like, oh, that's cool, a little connection that you make. Not like, I don't want like a Greta Van Fleet like total rip-off situation, which is what a couple of the songs felt like. They're still extremely well written. Like, to sound like Jason Isbell is not an insult, but to have an album full of songs where you are trying to be an original artist, and for the influence to overtake it so much that it just sounds like that artist, like that is going a little too far for me on that.
I would agree. I think that to loop back to what I thought was some of the strongest stuff, it seems to be swimming against the tide here. in the sense that like I thought a lot of the horn stuff worked. I think a lot of it was too like maximal. There were certain points where I'm like, what are we doing? This isn't being used in a like very nuanced way. But good for you for trying. I like that he tried to snake some jazz elements in, some like pop elements in, like more acoustic, more heartland rock. Like it's these deviations into stuff. And I think that was a barrier to some people, was like, oh, it's too eclectic and that kills the momentum. Like you have these songs that are kind of like in the middle of the middle of the album sag, which I
Mhm.
do think is true of this, where you've got like these momentum killers that make this album not bad but frustrating. And that's what it is to me. It's not bad, but it's frustrating because there really is like 2 or 3 albums, like you said, worth of content in here. You could do a more avant-garde, not necessarily even avant-garde, he doesn't go that far, but you could do something that's more like Tyler Childers' Snipe Hunters.
Mhm.
You could do kind of a Nebraska. You can kind of like, you can tell when you listen to these songs, you're like, these would have made a good companion to one another on an album where you didn't have these, which go on a separate album. It's tough. It's very tough because there's a unity to it. There's Zach Bryan's sound, which to me, the two like biggest identifying factors are his lyrics. He's very talented with like the image driven lyrics. They
Mhm.
don't always land, but they're for the most part good. And his voice, because there is no technique. I know the mumbles bother some people. I know the mushy mouth thing kind of bothers some
Mhm.
people. I will take character over technique if it's interesting 10 times out of 10.
Yes.
So that does work for me on this. It's just there were certain elements and arrangements that didn't really coalesce. And I think those were the moments where he was reaching out to be somebody else. The parts where he's not afraid to get weird, like I'll keep referencing Rivers and Creeks, or if it's Creeks and Rivers, I don't remember, but because he wasn't afraid to get kind of fucking weird, man, on that one. And I appreciated that. It's when he tries to be Childers or Springsteen or John Moreland, which is particularly interesting because John Moreland hates his fucking guts. That's a whole thing. Are you familiar with
Yeah.
John Moreland?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah.
So that whole stupid beef, because it sounds like John Moreland might be a little bit of an asshole himself.
Yes.
Um,
That is
but
for sure the case. For
I
sure.
mean, it sure
Yes.
seems that way. But it's also like Jason Isbell's kind of an asshole, and Amanda Shires is kind of an ass. These people might be assholes. So this kind of leads us to poor Zach Bryan and asking, like, okay, he's not the only one. So where do you draw the line? Like, you like them personally, so you won't tear them apart. Like, this is kind of unrelated, but um, I read this thing that was like Kurt Cobain hated Grateful Dead, and he
Mhm.
hated Jerry Garcia, and he hated hippies. Like, I don't love hippies either because they grew up to be the yuppies and the boomers that ruined the fucking world. But other than that, I have to look at like my love for Grateful Dead and my love for Jerry Garcia and like suspend that and listen to the actual criticism, which Cobain went light on. So I'm like, well, if you don't have a point, then I'm just going to assume I'm right.
Yeah.
But all of that is to say, like, where do you draw the line in terms of what you are and aren't willing to consume? If you think this is like a bad person, how much does it like affect your enjoyment of the album and like how you're able to connect with it? I was able to make some peace with it, but there were still moments of honest self-reflection where I did go, well, that just makes you sound kind of like an asshole. And
Mhm.
that kind of draws me out of it. So if there were two things listening, and you can't count length, it was too many times where he tried to like really ape his influences, and then
Mhm.
the times where he was almost too honest to the point of me not liking him very much.
Yeah.
But I will take that. I will take that over being completely full of shit and not admitting to his faults.
Yes. Yeah. I think for me, I think this album was a good step forward for him as someone that's probably listened more in full to the other albums he's released. I think there is a lot more honesty about himself on this album. I think there was a lot more admittance to his part in a lot of the problems he's had in his life. It seems like this so far, this person he's married to now is, or at least engaged to, is like, seems like it's stable. I think he is sober, which is different than any other time he's ever tried to fix any problems in his life. Like alcohol was never something he cut out. So I think there are actually, I think for that reason, I think the honesty for me, just knowing that he is sober now, and that part of the deal, I think, is being honest with yourself as well as everybody else. And, maybe this is a small part of his apology, to everybody he might not be able to talk to in person. Maybe that's part of the deal with this too. But I think overall the things that, and I don't want to say it really like drags it down for me, is it, because I think if you took a lot of these songs like off of this album and put on, like, if he had released all these songs that I think he could have cut off of this one as an EP, I'd have been like, oh yeah, these songs are pretty decent. But I think when you're staring down the barrel of 118 minutes, that used to be the length of a pretty decent length movie back in the day, and I don't mean to look at the time when I go to listen to these albums, but when you don't see the bottom of the track listing, that can be a little bit daunting sometimes, folks. So I think you always give it a chance, because there's plenty of really long albums we've listened to that were fantastic almost all the way through, if not all the way through. I think with this one, there's just enough of it that missed for me. And I think there's a lot to really like, so it's hard for me to like bump this any further down than like a 7, I think. But it's just like, it's not it to me. I feel like there's so much room for improvement. I think the 7 is only because with so many songs, there was probably a good dozen of them that I really liked, and that's basically a whole album's worth. So I'm like, it gave me a whole album's worth of good music here, Zach. Like, what's the deal with the fluff?
Well, and that's the thing, is like, you get a song like Slicked Back. You think this is slicked back? This is pushed back. There's a little Tim Robinson for you guys. Slicked Back is like the most obvious mainstream slam dunk song on the thing, but it's fluff. It's pretty emotionally thin and pretty musically thin. And by the way, it is kind of hard to talk about this album from like a music and production standpoint, because
All over the
again,
place with that too.
it's all over the place, and not one element kind of stands out. Like the guitar playing on this was insane, the drumming on that, Neil Peart lost his mind doing, like, there's not really one thing you can latch onto other really than lyrical intent and the voice that's carrying it off. And if that's what you're looking at, is like, okay, well then where are the moments where he's the most interesting? And it's like, Slick Back is fluff, but it's where he seems to have his head most in the game. Like, it's so bizarre. It's so bizarre, because some of the more interesting stuff, like the song where he's referencing ice, what the fuck is it called?
Bad News.
Bad News. So like, this was an opportunity to take a stand, and not like take a stand for my side. If he had taken a big, bold, swinging, big old hit at like being pro MAGA, and he came out and he proudly doffed his little red cap and went, yeah, that's right, if you would just comply, then you won't get shot. I would have to hate him for it, but you took a stance. And I think he kind of wants to have his cake and eat it too, where it's like, well, by name dropping ice, I'll get kind of cool points, but I'm not going to like really clarify this stance too much, because Republicans buy sneakers too. So it's this wishy-washiness that wants to be congratulated for taking a stand. And if you want to be apolitical, that's fine. But as soon as you signal that you're trying to be political, you better go the whole way. Hustler style, baby.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
and I think he as far as getting political, because he talks about, how he served 8 years, and when he came back, they said the land's been all sold. So there's definitely some lines of like Fortunate Son, and some of these older style like protest songs. But again, I think you're right where he's like straddling the line a little bit, where it's almost like it's a character saying this stuff and not really him. And
And you're
and I
presenting observations, you're not really like giving it a personalized context. You're not really saying how you as yourself or as a character
yeah
are relate. If you want to be like Johnny came home from the Navy, like present a perspective, but you're just like describing a building basically.
yeah, and I think that's been a criticism of his, and whether, and again, like nobody's forcing anyone to be political or whatever, but you can't just like dip your toe in just to like get the views and then not, it's like that's what I think people have a problem with, is you're just kind of like just barely swimming in the shallow end just so you can say you got in the pool, and but you didn't really go swimming, and I think that's what people have the issue with him. And who knows again what his actual views are. I would probably assume, having lots of money, he's pretty well separated from caring about much of any of that. So again, who knows how he actually feels about that stuff, because he didn't really tell us in any of the music. And again, I think that's part of the issue with the album here. There's a lot of really clever songwriting. There's a lot of really clever lines. The song Deanne's Denim, that song, I can't help but think that controversy with Sydney Sweeney in the jeans commercial is what caused him to write this song. Whether it's about her, I don't think it's about her referencing that specifically, but like he wrote a song specifically about denim, family jeans, and like that whole controversy with that commercial was, oh, it's in the I've got good jeans. And it's like I just can't think that's coincidence. And I'm like, are we really letting pop culture like be that obvious in its references in the music? But I just couldn't. That was just a little thing I couldn't get out of my head.
Yeah, why don't you just write a little ditty about Hawk Tuah while you're at it?
Yeah.
And I guess I look at that and I say it might be an instance of parallel thinking just because it's so obvious, but that's kind of damning to Zach Bryan's cause because it's like you're supposed to be this like generational talent and
Mhm.
you kind of went for the same low hanging fruit as American Eagle or Aeropostale or whoever did this. Um, and like, what did they mean by the ad? There's impact versus intent, and this gets
Mhm.
us on a whole other road. But it's like there were the people's reactions to it, and almost none of them were, "I want to buy a pair of blue jeans."
Yeah.
So if low hanging fruit and like we biologists do it in their genes, like if we're going to use low hanging fruit like that in the jeans commercial, probably don't use it in your song
Mhm.
if it's parallel thinking and you have to be aware of the world and like that happened. I'd probably scrap that song, not because it's like I don't want to be seen as a nazi, I don't want to get us kicked off YouTube, I don't want to be seen as one of them, so I won't even play footsies with the idea. It's no, you just don't want to. It's not an interesting pop culture moment, and it's not particularly clever. So jettison it. And you have two ways you can go with this. You can make nice personal songs about your own experience and going down and catching a bullfrog in the creek, or you can be controversial. And again, that doesn't mean you have to have my politics or you even need to talk about politics. But if you're gonna play footsies with being edgy and having a voice and being bold, take a fucking stand one way or another. I will respect it. If we are on the opposite sides, I'll call you a fucking dumb loser, but I will respect the fact that you stood up and spoke your mind. And there for the first time that I've really noticed is a fair amount of like socio-political wishy-washiness to the music. And I'm like, that's the stuff that really doesn't work. You talk about length,
Mhm.
you talk about like genre confusion and fatigue. The stuff that really doesn't work is where you're paying lip service to the idea of like, I'm going to tell you how I feel about something and I'm going to take a stand and be vulnerable. And he doesn't do it. It's like you're afraid to be controversial. You are controversial and you're afraid of it. And that's keeping you from tapping
Mhm.
into the good shit and paring it down and just giving us a focused, I'll give you 14 songs. Why not? If you can keep them under fucking 3 minutes, I'll give you 14. But what would be great? 11 to 12 songs on a 38-minute album that's verbal wildfire, which is you exposing yourself. This, just for a guy that gets credit for being bold, this felt like a step back. It didn't feel like he was this close to a coming out.
So I think that's why for me this one is going to be a 7, because I think there is a long way to go. Like an 8 to me, I think is like an album I would go back and listen to. A 9 is going to be like this is a like album of the year kind of candidate. Like a 10 is going to be like, this is an album of my lifetime kind of candidate, you know? So it's like, I think 7 is just, that's where we get into the territory, where it's like, there's probably a lot of this album I'm going to go back and listen to, because there's a lot of these songs. I thought South and Pine was a fantastic song. I really do like the song Bad News. I think it's got a really good, I just like that really kind of low droney kind of thing he does. Like that really works for me. I know that specifically is what turns a lot of people off from him. That for me works because I really like the band Brown Bird, and that's a lot of how that sounds too. We need to do a Brown Bird episode. I know it's probably going to get zero traction, but while we're on the subject here, we need to do a Brown Bird episode. But I think for me, there is enough to like on here that it gets to a 7, but I think that's just from putting up shots. That's that, like the shooting percentage was not good on this one. This was just this was just reps. With enough reps, like your batting average isn't going to be high, but you're going to rack up a lot of hits. And I think that's what this album was, where it's just like, is it going to be a Hall of Famer? No. Is it going to make the All-Star team? Probably not. Is it going to fill a roster spot? Sure.
Yeah, I mean, you trot this one out at, some commemorative night like they do with like old Celtics players.
Mm-hmm.
Here's Benjamin Fitzwell, and you're like, I've never heard of him. And it's like, he was a bench warmer for 2 seasons. It's like, okay. And that's, I guess, kind of a very dramatic way of assessing this album. I am unfortunately going to have to give it the biggest fence sitter rating of all time, technically towards the lower end when you think about it. If we're not giving zeros, then 5 is not the middle, 5 is the top of the bottom.
Zero is possible.
Okay, if a 0 is possible, then I'm giving you the most fence sittery rating of a 5.
Yeah, because the 7 is a C minus.
Yeah, and that'll get you a degree.
Yeah.
But a 50, you get a big see me on your paper, and no one wants to see that. See me, underline in red ink. And that's the thing for me, I guess, is it gets the fence sitter rating because it does fall right in the middle, not necessarily in production quality or songwriting or lyrical depth, because it does have all of these things at different points. And it's not even like a tale of two albums, like it's a dead split between like this half gets it all right sonically and gets it all right from a production standpoint, and this half gets it all right from lyrics and themes and blah blah blah. It's not even like you can divide it up that cleanly, because some songs that have great lyrics versus songs that have more of an interesting sound will not then also necessarily have the production or the thematic depth that you want. So it's like all halves. It's a million halves. It's certain things that work well and certain things that don't work at all. And then within those things, half of what you've got going on there works and half doesn't. It's very confusing. It's very scattershot. It's not bad. I believe a lot of effort and craftsmanship went into it. I don't think you can say he like slagged off, but that's the problem, is he doesn't understand. Kill your darlings, become an editor. Cut half of these fucking songs, trim the fat, get it down to a good, lean, manageable length, and you'll probably have something to say. Because this is the equivalent of you or me on here just going for 4 minutes. At a certain point, like right about now, people are probably tuning the fuck out to what I'm saying. So I mean, it happens. So I guess all of that is to say, Zach Bryan, I don't necessarily have anything against you. I don't necessarily have anything against this album. It's thumbs in the middle. It's the biggest old fence sitter rating of 5.
Yeah, that's and I feel like that was even honestly a little bit higher than I thought you were going to go when we started talking about it. But it makes a lot of sense because there's probably about half of a good album here. So you got half of a good score. I think if you were to compress this album down to 12 or 13 songs, I think that forces you, maybe you steal some of those good ideas from some of those other ones where it was only one good idea in 4 minutes of mostly bad ideas, and maybe you start adding those good ones. You start compressing all these good ideas into like 13, 14 songs on an album. And I think we'll be cooking with some gas with Zach Bryan. But that's why I'm saying, that's why I think he's this close. Because if he figures that out, I think we've got a real hot potato on our hands when he does figure that out.
Here's hoping. And Jeff and I will be there at the tip of the Sphere. Excuse me. We won't be waiting in line at the Sphere in Las Vegas. Jerry would have hated it. Sorry, Bob Weirdine fucked me up.
If you need someone to kill some time, just tell a deadhead to find the tip of the sphere.
What, man?
Yeah.
I don't even understand that concept. Speaking as a deadhead, and we've covered a lot of ground like this. We've had many a conversation like this at youtube.com/C/out on that line. Gang, here we find ourselves once again. I won't make this long and complicated. You know the ins and outs. You know you need to subscribe, click the bell so that you get notified of new videos, leave a thumbs up to like the video, and of course, leave a comment or jaunty comment to make our day. You know all of this. I don't have to stress this to you every time. But I'm trying to become the change that I want to see. I'm trying to deliver some structure to a group of people who desperately need it. I am, in many ways, the John Harbaugh to the New York Giants that is this podcast.
Let's go. Let's
John
go.
Harbaugh, ladies and gentlemen, is going to bring a culture of accountability that the fellas in the locker room and the New York Football Giants so desperately crave. And I want to be that for you at youtube.com/C/out on that line.
That is beautiful. I should have worn my Giants hoodie. I wore it for the first time in like 5 years the other night. Marla had never seen me wear it ever, I think. So it had to have been.
Whoa.
Yeah. And I was like, yeah, because I finally have a reason to. It's because we got our guy. We got our quarterback. We got our quarterback, and we got our guy. Looking
Everybody
forward
wants
to
to
it.
be part of a miracle, baby.
And folks, you'll be able to tell just by our emotions next football season, and keep up with us until then too. Go back and watch all those past videos. But if we're in a good mood, it probably means the Giants are playing well. If we're in a bad mood, it probably means they're not. And that's why we've been in such a bad mood lately, the last 5 years or so. But folks, we can only get better. We can only get happier. We can only help the Giants win by us buying merch. And we do that by you watching our videos. So make sure you go to that link that Alex said. And until next time, folks, be good to each other, or at least be good at it.